I think the lesson in that is the importance of marching to the beat of your own drum, the importance of really digging deep and figuring out in your soul what it is you're meant to be doing. Because I think like you build it and they will come. And I think that you can't just march around and talk about everything. You've got to start doing things.
On the 43rd episode of Passion in Progress, author, chef, and TV personality Georgia Pellegrini. Pellegrini is a modern-day pioneer with superwoman skills who empowers audiences to step outside their comfort zones and discover inner bravery and resourcefulness. She has 3 critically acclaimed books: Food Heroes, 16 Culinary Artisans Preserving Tradition, Girl Hunter, Revolutionizing the Way We Eat, One Hunt at a Time, and Modern Pioneering, more than 150 recipes, projects, and skills for a self-sufficient life. In this podcast, we talk about the process of writing a book from proposal to publishing, her unique adventure getaways for women to experience the outdoors, and we dive deep into the topic of manual literacy. If you like the content that I've been putting out, please share it with a friend. Instagram stories, Twitter, Facebook, all the things. If you want to tag me in anything, I'm at Javier Mercedes X. I love hearing and seeing what you guys have to say about the podcast because that gives me the feedback that I need and it shows me like, hey, what I'm doing is worth it and you guys are getting value from this show. Because that's what it's all about. And speaking of feedback, if you guys are listening to this podcast on the iTunes app, if you could please leave me a review. That is also a place that lets me know how my show is doing. If you are interested in supporting the podcast through Patreon, it is www.patreon.com/Javier Mercedes. That's Javier Mercedes, just like the car. With all that being said, let's go ahead and hop into the 43rd episode of Passion in Progress with Georgia Pellegrini. What is up, Mercedes? Javier Mercedes here for yet again another Passion in Progress show, where we interview inspiring people and hopefully through hearing their stories, you too are motivated to go out and pursue your passions. Today on the show, we have TV host, chef, author, public speaker, outdoor adventure expert, and lifestyle blogger, Georgia Pellegrini. How are you today?
Good. That was quite an introduction. I love that.
Yeah, just by the little list that I said right there, there's a plethora of things that you dabble in. But as of right now, what is your main stuff that you're going on?
Yeah, sometimes I have such a hard time explaining what it is that I do to people that I just say I'm an accountant to like sort of shut the conversation down because it's so much effort. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it has a lot of tentacles and it's sort of happened very, yeah, it's happened pretty organically over the course of about 10 years. I started out as a chef, and then I sort of from there became a writer and did all these other things as a result of that being in that food media space. Mm-hmm. But that journey to becoming a chef was really, I can take you way back if you want from the beginning, but I really was on Wall Street and pretty miserable.
Currently, I feel like you are an encyclopedia of anything out. If it has to do with outdoors and food and I guess like general decor as well, but repurposing things from the outdoors, I feel like you just have a huge, massive amounts of information on any of that. Yeah,
I think the term that I use that I came up with a while back, or actually I give my dad credit for it, is manual literacy. Mm-hmm. The idea that, we all have sort of lost touch with the knowledge around having to make things, using our hands, whether it's weeding, digging, burning, cooking, making in some form, and just how sort of therapeutic and important that is and how it's the antidote to these modern times that we live in. And so I think I would say that I'm a teacher of all of those types of things, and particularly as it relates to the outdoors or food and cooking and using your hands there.
You mentioned Wall Street and everything, so let's go ahead and take it back to that if that's where you want to start your I guess the impetus of your story into all of these things.
Looking back, I was really fortunate, and I know the name of this podcast would relate a lot to this, which is my dad used to say, mastery doesn't create passion creates mastery. And and I think that was sort of the sort of beat that I marched to as a young person growing up. I grew up on the same land that my great-grandfather lived on, so it's been in my family for 100 years in the Hudson Valley of New York. So I was fortunate in the sense that I had a really deep connection to a place. I was really rooted in this place, and I was rooted in nature and being in the outdoors, using my hands. I had a grandmother and a great aunt who lived on the same property in the house that they were born in. And, they were these wonderful old ladies who would go around in the gardens and teach me about things, teach me, about wild edibles, teach me about, how to cook and make the most of what's around you. And they saw a possibility where the rest of the world saw weeds. And so I think I was fortunate looking back now at just, how rare that can be in this day and age. And they were two very strong, independent women. I had a very strong, independent mother. Everyone sort of always worked for themselves and kind of carved their own path. And so I think I had that as a model to look at growing up. And I went off to college. I was fortunate to, have my parents invest in really great educations. And the problem when you go sort of down that path of these institutions is that they give you these paths of least resistance for careers oftentimes, or at least they did when I was in college. It's either finance or consulting or law school. And, I was a poor college student, and it was pretty alluring to get an offer in finance where, they whisk you into Manhattan and wine you and dine you. And, you spend your time, especially as a summer intern, going to Alicia Keys concerts on the beach. And, little did they tell
something out of a movie.
Yeah. So little did they tell you that, that wasn't going to be what it was like when it was a full-time gig. And, I accepted the full-time job after I spent a summer there. And I went on to work with them after I graduated from college. And, it was really eye-opening, and I'm really grateful for that time, actually, because I think the silver lining when you're doing something that makes you unhappy is that it forces you to think about what you're doing when you're happiest.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of, everything feels like it's in high relief in that moment because you're like, wow, this sucks. When am I actually happy? Because I can't remember that time because I'm so miserable right now. And it forced me to do a lot of soul searching. I read a lot of books. I looked at people and thought about, are they people that I want to be when I grow up? I also took, the Myers-Briggs and tried to understand my personality type, which I'm a huge proponent of, that and the Enneagram, which we can get into if you want. But,
sure.
I spent a lot of time really digging, and I'm one of those tinkerers in life. So I love tinkering and figuring out how to make things better and fix things and improve things. And any aspect of my life, I'm always tinkering to see if it's not quite working, what can I do to adjust it? And so for me, going home late at night and, they'd drive you home in these town cars because they were required to at some point when you were working so late. And I would just had tears rolling down my face, and it was feeding my bank account, but not my soul. And I was just at this moment, and I had these role models in my family of people who were sort of revolutionaries. They didn't really live for the money. They lived for what they were passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And I always remember my dad's mantra, which is, mastery doesn't create passion, passion creates mastery. I ultimately decided that when I was happiest was when I was doing those things that were really very similar to what I had been doing growing up, using my hands, getting my hands in the dirt, practicing what I call now manual literacy. And so I waited for my signing bonus to clear, or my end of the year bonus to clear my checking account. And I checked out. I gave them my notice.
How many people leave after that? I feel like there's probably more people in your situation.
Yeah, so I was one of the first. I will give you that. I will tell you that. But usually, I think there's first year analysts, second year analysts. Some people leave after the first year. A lot of people make it 2 years.
They want 2 signing bonuses.
Yeah, they want 2 end of the year bonuses for sure. I think what it came down to for me, and I think it took a lot of, some kind of intelligence as a young person, but I just sort of looked around me and I looked at all these adults in their 50s or 60s, still working, had no relationship with their kids or their family. And that's not to say I'm criticizing anyone who chooses to be in finance. I think that there are people who really respond well to those environments and have that kind of, passion and brain. But I just looked at the people around me, and none of them I felt like were mentors, people who I really wanted to aspire to be. And they didn't seem happy. And there was just a lot of misery. Especially I couldn't find a woman around me that seemed happy. In fact, I sat next to Erin Callan every day, who's been pretty outspoken since leaving Lehman Brothers. Because, by the way, Lehman Brothers is where I was at, which we know how that turned out.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually sat near Erin Callan every day, who has written books about her time at Lehman and the crash. And, she's really been very honest about the sacrifices that she had to make. And I really respect her for that, because I saw those sacrifices. And I thought, as a young woman, I was in my early 20s, I didn't want to live the rest of my life in that cycle. And I thought that the longer I stayed, the harder it would be to leave, because you start to build this lifestyle for yourself that you have to then sustain. And you need that money to sustain it. And so you're not living your life. You're sort of on this hamster wheel.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah. And the financial environment and all those investment banks has really changed since then too, I will say. But, I've always been a bit of a renegade and not been a very good rule follower and not been good at staying in line, and honestly not a great employee. Like, I'm just not
I like how you admit that.
I'm just not. Like, I've never been good at working for people. And I had to recognize that about myself pretty early on, that I think to be truly happy, I was going to always have to work for myself. Even now, I don't really have a lot of people working for me on a full-time basis, because I just like to have my own little pod and, get the support as I need it. But I'm a very independent person, for better or for worse. And so that's sort of, how I got there. And I realized for me, it was about food and cooking and using my hands. And I took a leap of faith and I enrolled in culinary school. And that was a pretty big leap, because I went from working crazy hours in investment banking, making a lot of money, to crazy hours in a professional kitchen, making below minimum wage. But what was so interesting about it was that it didn't feel like work in the same way. I felt alive. I felt energized. I felt excited. I'd be working 18-hour days, which were just insane. And it was brutal conditions, because these were really high-end restaurants. But I loved it. I felt alive for the first time. And I think to me, that was a sign that I was doing the right thing.
Can you talk about the teamwork that goes on, like in the, I guess in the back room in the restaurant when you guys are actually cooking? Because I feel like part of that has to do with well, I don't know how it is on Wall Street, but I feel like when you're a part of a bigger chain of like stuff and you're like, you have hands in different things,
yes.
like it's more fulfilling.
Yes.
A final product at least is more fulfilling.
In professional kitchens, especially the really high-end ones, you feel like you're getting ready for a performance every night. I almost describe it as like a well thought out ballet, where it's this choreography and you all know your part in the dance, but you really have to coordinate and cooperate and communicate. But you also owe it to the rest of the ensemble to not mess up and to show up for your end of the bargain. And so, you each have your responsibilities or your stations with the dishes that you're responsible for, the ingredients you're responsible for prepping. And so it's so intense that there were days, and usually for me, like I was working, for example, like a Blue Hill at Stone Barns was one of my very first jobs, which is a Dan Barber restaurant that's well known. It's at a Rockefeller estate right outside of Manhattan. And it was so many hours that you didn't even know what day it was often. You didn't know what time it was often. You were in this bubble, this beautiful bubble of a kitchen, but you were just in this zone. And I think, I often refer to the term flow. I don't know if you've read that book, Flow, but it's about how when you're in a zone of something that you're enjoying or that you're passionate about, you get this sort of high where it's like this uninterrupted focus, and it's like deep work kind of.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so I think in those kitchens, when you're doing something that you're intensely passionate about, that you've really worked so hard to get, perfect, because you're always pursuing perfection in those environments. I think it's a very sort of inspiring thing, but you're in a different world. Like you sort of lose touch with your friends and your family and their schedule, and because you're working weird hours. So you're in this sort of like army of other people who are in that with you, and that becomes your family for a period of time. And you eat weird like sandwiches at 3 a.m. with all these weird leftovers, and it's just kind of how you make it work.
Did you have any moment where it was your, like something that you did was the fault for a dish? And then it was just like, because I'm just thinking of like a Gordon Ramsay just like being like, what is going on? Like, and calling out so-and-so. Because correct me if I'm wrong, like when the dish comes out, like at least at the beginning of when guests start to arrive, they're like testing whatever the dishes are to make sure everything's on par.
Yeah. Every restaurant's different. I'm trying to think if I ever had like one crazy event. I mean, I'm kind of a perfectionist myself, but I think for me, like it was more just you get so focused and intense that you like inadvertently do something stupid, like grab a hot handle that's been in the oven,
I've already done that. I've done that.
Yeah. Or like crazy burns on your arms, like temperature's so hot, like your eyelashes curl, but you don't really have time to like worry about that. And so it's like you feel like you're a little bit in battle. I mean, I don't want to, it's definitely not as bad as being in battle, but I'm just saying like if there's sort of this feeling of, this intensity, and it's not something that you experience in normal life. Your senses are heightened. You smell differently, you see differently, you taste differently. Everything is just in a very heightened state. And that's hard to be in for many hours at a time, day after day. It's not really good for your nervous system, which I think is why people burn out so quickly and why they don't last long. I would say a lot of restaurants, the average, cycle is you'll get someone to stay for a year and then there's a turnover typically. So
that sounds fun.
Yeah. You learn a lot of useful skills. You learn to your brain will split up into many parts at once. It's amazing my multitasking ability now, just from being in professional kitchens, where I can it's like tapping your head and rubbing your stomach. You just know all the things that are moving at once and how to manage them simultaneously, which it's not always a good way to live either, but it's a good skill set sometimes, especially in business.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like you could probably tap your head, rub your stomach, like twiggle
Hop
your
on
toes,
yeah,
and do like
totally.
Look cross-eyed at the same time.
Totally.
So how did you get from there to? I guess would the next step be, because I know you wrote a book, and then there's the adventure getaways. Is there stuff in between there?
Yeah, I was on this journey of self-discovery in these kitchens, working the same hours, making no money. Well, let me actually say, when I was working at Blue Hill at Stone Barns, you had to be very hands-on with your ingredients. They have amazing greenhouses, they have animals, they have eggs, they have honeybees. And so part of our role as a chef was to butcher or kill and butcher some of the turkeys for the kitchen. And that was a really intense watershed moment for me, because even though I had grown up fishing and foraging and living off the land to some degree, I had never been that face-on with my ingredients before. As a chef, I had been, taking animals apart, skinning, filleting fish, getting my hands on all the bits. So it wasn't too far of a step. But the idea of having a live animal in front of me and having to cut its windpipe and hold it down and, eviscerate it and pluck it and take it all the way to the dinner plate was such an emotional, intense experience for me as a human being and as a chef. But I thought to myself, if I'm going to be a meat eater, I should be able to do this, and I want to pay the full karmic price of the meal. And so that was a moment for me as someone who cooked professionally, where I really wanted to explore that further, because we were also also coming sort of to the collective consciousness was our industrial feedlot system, and people were becoming increasingly concerned in the news about the way animals are treated in feedlots. And so to me, I thought, this is a really interesting moment in time where I don't want to participate in that feedlot system. I don't want to consume meat from it. I don't want to cook meat from it. But I do want to be a meat eater. I'm an omnivore at the end of the day. I believe that humans are meant to eat a huge variety and range of things, from animal protein, vegetable protein, nuts, fruits, all that stuff. And we've sort of stopped doing that. We eat mostly corn and soy and like a few types of things that we're used to tasting over and over. And so as a chef, it was a very interesting moment, right? Where I was like, wow, this is really scary, but I want to be able to do this if I'm going to continue to be a meat eater. So that was that major watershed moment for me at Blue Hill at Stone Barns. And then I left. And I left because I was burnt out, but I did go to another kitchen. I went to Gramercy Tavern in Manhattan, which is another legendary Danny Meyer restaurant. And then from there, I went to a restaurant in the south of France. And a friend of mine...
So you were like right into the fire.
I was in the fire. Yeah, I was going strong, living my crazy 20s lives with burns on my arms.
Before you continue, would you agree that at that point in time, I guess it's putting your opinion on anyone, but when you're that age, do you think it's better to stick with one job and like really buckle down on that, or try a whole bunch of different things like you were doing?
Yeah.
And see what works? Yeah,
that's a really great question. So I struggle with this because I think it oftentimes depends on what type of person you are as well. I see a lot of young people around me now, like millennials or even younger, who come into a situation with like the sense of entitlement and don't really they want to be the CEO, and they want to kind of just do what works for them. And I think that there is a degree to which you really have to put your head down and pay your dues. But by that but at the same time, in my early 20s, even to my 30s, I probably had like 10 different types of jobs. I was dabbling in so many things, but I was doing it with an intensity. So when I did do something, I showed up for it and I committed to it. And I think that's what the difference is you're entitled to try a whole smorgasbord of things to figure out what to figure out like what really makes you tick, because that's what we're all entitled to as human beings. We should be doing those things that make us want to hop out of bed in the morning. But by that same token, like you can't do it half-assed. You have to really show up with all of yourself. And, I always say like I do things with the intensity of a jackhammer. I don't really know how to do anything in between because if I want to do it, I'm going to like really be passionate about it and do it well. Because if you're not going to do it well, then you're not going to really squeeze all the juice out of it and figure out if it is the right thing for you. So I think it's both. I think people should try many things. I think people should try many things at once even, but that's also my style. I don't think that everyone operates with the same, intensity. So to each his own, but I think like I said, it depends on what kind of person you are. But I do think that we have a problem, right now in our culture of like people showing up feeling entitled without having paid their dues. And I think people have to sort of invest in paying their dues and things as well. To become good at something. Yeah. That's important.
Yeah, I think especially doing this podcast, I don't think I'd be as relatable to any guest or anything if I was just like, I was like freelancing like 4 different jobs or 5 different jobs at one point in time and like doing all this other stuff and everything in my own career. But it comes to head in terms of talking to people. I kind of put it in terms of comedians. Like if you go see a comedian and they haven't like experienced any life things, they're not necessarily relatable in their comedy, which some people are just really talented and can do that kind of thing, but you can tell that when like a comedian really knows or has experienced stuff.
100%. It builds character, and bringing character to the equation just makes things more interesting.
Yeah, but with experience, let's go ahead and take it back to France.
Okay. So
you're literally in the culinary mecca now.
Yeah. I mean, and I had always had this dream of cooking in France. It was just this fantasy I had had for years. And a friend of mine who had worked with at Blue Hill at Stone Barns, he had taken his bicycle to Europe, driven through Europe, and stopped off at kitchens and just cooked with them for a week and gone on to the next one. And one day he wrote me an email and he said, "I'm in this restaurant in France right now, in the south of France, and it just reminded me so much of a place that you would love. And I feel like you're supposed to be here."
Wow.
I know. It was this really weird serendipitous moment. Mm-hmm. And I looked it up, and it was called La Chassagnette, and it was in Provence, about to the west of a little town called Arles. And it was a destination restaurant. And in France, that's a big thing. People take a special journey to have a meal. And that's what a lot of Michelin restaurants are about. So I wrote to the chef there, and I said, "Can I come and cook with you?" And I said I wanted to come in September. And he said, "I will receive you in September. Can you come in August?" That was his response. Like, this is the world I was living in. Very little communication, just a lot of yelling and doing things. So I said, all right. So I packed up my knife bag and a suitcase. And
That's a thing. So you travel with your own knives.
Yes, you do. Chefs have all their own knives. Mm-hmm. Sharpen your knives. You're responsible. It's like your tool. That's that you're responsible for.
That's awesome.
So
the more you know.
Yeah. I mean, I used to spend time with these Japanese men in Manhattan and the Lower East Side sharpening knives. Like, it was a really amazing therapeutic thing, and they teach me how to sharpen knives properly. And
sounds awesome.
Yeah. There's a lot of little fun things in the culinary world.
Is it Japanese steel? Is that like
So Japanese knives are pretty special. I mean, there's so many different types of knives out there, but I began to love Japanese knives, and they have the blade on them has 2 different angles on either side.
I'm thinking like medieval, like thinking like Lord of the Rings, like, you have Japanese steel. That's like from the woods of blah, 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 forged by the dwarves.
Yeah, like they're very, totally. I mean, they're very meticulous about their tools. And they had there's a beautiful knife shop with these, men who are making knives and sharpening knives. And it was just this very therapeutic sort of thing to go and do.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I took my knife bag and I went to Europe. I remember it was like, during a time where I was pretty naive, and I showed up, I took a train from London to Paris, and then took a train from Paris down to Provence. And the restaurant manager picked me up and took me to this little oasis in these gardens in the French countryside. And he sat me down and he fed me lunch and gave me a warm cookie. And that would just come out from, the pastry chef. And it was just this wonderland. I mean, it was like every wonderful cliche you could imagine. You had the old gardener and his 3-legged cat and his, antique farm equipment and these wildflowers everywhere. And, eggplants dangling in the trellises above, it was just.
I love the juxtaposition between this and getting whisked away to Alicia Keys concerts.
Right, totally. I mean, it was just like, it couldn't have been more stripped down from my existence on Wall Street. I had these sort of high-heeled, suit-wearing days, cocktails and martinis on, rooftops and very glossy and glitzy. And now here I was with burns on my arms and a knife bag in the south of France. Like, literally, that's all I had in a suitcase. It was a pretty interesting moment, actually. And I think maybe one of the turning points of my life, because it was hard. It was incredibly hard. I hardly spoke the language. French kitchens are even more intense than U.S. kitchens. It was almost all men. Weren't thrilled about an American girl being in the kitchen. They put me up in a house that was owned by the same family that owned the land and the restaurant, but it was sort of this rundown house where I had 3 green frogs living in my bathroom.
That's awesome.
I had
Did you name them?
I didn't actually. I should have though. I had I was sleeping under a tablecloth that I stole from the restaurant because I didn't have any bedding for my bed.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a super stripped down existence compared to what I had done in my life in New York. But it was really a special time. I was alone. I was lonely. I was working so hard. But the French and the Europeans have their siesta. So during my time off between lunch and dinner service every day, I'd take a bus to the nearest town, sit at a cafe and get on my computer. And that was the day before iPhones, before all these apps, I had this
I'm
really heavy,
really
heavy laptop. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have any convenience. I didn't have a car. I had to walk to a long dirt road to a bus to get to a town.
Do a lot of people have cars there though?
Yeah, there were people who had cars there. I just was an American girl who didn't have a car in France. And sometimes the chef would loan me his car from time to time, and I had no idea how to drive stick shift. But I told him I did just so I had a car. And I'll never forget this. My roommate, she was there for a short time from Spain, and she taught me in Spanish how to drive a stick shift. It was amazing.
Do you know how to speak Spanish?
No. It was amazing. It was amazing. So I learned, and I just kind of puttered my way through France. I mean, one time I got stalled in this knocked on this Frenchman's door, and he tried to get me out of a ditch. Also didn't speak the same language. So it was an adventure. And I just was going for it. And so on my time off in the middle of the day, I would just usually go to a cafe and sit and write to people. I would write these update emails, and so just updates from France to just a group of friends and family, telling them what life was like and what I was doing. And
blogging before blogging was the thing.
Exactly. I mean, this heavy laptop, no iPhone, no cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
I had to, everything was very analog still, and all I had was email on a really heavy laptop. And so someone wrote to me one day. A few people did, but one guy in particular said, you really should consider writing a book. And I was like, yeah, I have had this concept for either a show or a book, and I have had it in my mind, but I don't really know where to go from there. He's like, well, send me something. I know a literary agent. And I was like, all right. So on a day off, or on a day really actually between lunch and dinner service, I went into the gardens at the restaurant, and I sat under these quince trees on a picnic table. I opened up this heavy laptop, and I wrote in bullet points my idea for this book. And it was called Food Heroes. And the idea was I wanted to tell the story of all of these incredible artisans who I'd met in these kitchens, who would show up with these things that they had foraged, or someone who had the world's largest variety of fig trees, and someone who was obsessed with olive oil and had left their corporate job to start growing pressing olives. I found their stories fascinating, and I found a lot of them had major career changes. And on my days off, I'd actually find myself spending time with them. I found them really inspiring. So he forwarded it to a literary agent, and she ended up asking if she could talk to me. And so I took the bus to the nearest town. I went into this internet cafe, into a phone booth. I'll never forget, there were a bunch of Middle Eastern men screaming, playing cards. It was this like really loud, boisterous place. And I'm just walking into this phone booth, calling this woman in New York from France. And she said, I think you should write a book. And I said, how do I do that? Which is like not what you're supposed to say to a literary agent. But I was really fortunate looking back. She sent me some sample book proposals. And on my time off, I'd sit, in my bedroom with the tablecloth and write it on my laptop. And I spent the last part of my time in Europe finishing that book proposal, traveling to a few different other countries to be able to write some of those chapters. And she sold it when I got back to the US. And I went on to write 3 books in 4 years, which nearly killed me. But I did it.
There's a term that I had on I accidentally misspelled because I heard it wrong, veracity. And so I thought so it's ferocity, right? But I thought he said veracity, and he was like, I actually like the term veracity better because it pairs velocity with ferocity.
Oh, yeah,
I was so I feel like you were approaching it with some veracity. Hashtag we're making veracity happen.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been an intense person, and I was just doing life intensely. But what was special about it, and the one sort of most poetic moment is while I was living in the south of France, Lehman Brothers, where I had worked, went under. That's when it collapsed. And all of my bosses who had spent their lives working there, who were in their 50s and 60s, who I didn't want to be when I grew up, they lost everything, a lot of them. They lost a lot. Maybe not everything, but a lot. And, I think for me that was really sad, but also validating that I think you always have to trust your instincts and trust your gut, trust your jockeys, that someone used to say. Your jockeys are those people who are like riding your horse for you, and like let them do their job and don't try to micromanage them. And I think that was, trusting my gut and knowing this doesn't feel right to me, even though it was a scary leap of faith to leave behind that lifestyle and that money. Ultimately, I definitely lost the stock that I did have at Lehman Brothers from staying there. My bank account, I had nothing in my bank account basically when I was in France because Lehman Brothers went under. And so that was an interesting life lesson. I had made the right choice.
So, you were already hitting the ground running on your new career.
Yeah.
Four books. Geez, in 3 years? Is that what you said?
3 books in 4 years.
3 books in 4 years. How long does it take to do something like that? And just from like a 3,000 foot view, like you explained a little bit how the first book went down, but after you got the first book out, was it much easier to do the next 2? So
I think for me, books come out of me because they have to. Like I had them in me, and I had things to say that I felt passionate about. I have one gelling right now in me, but it's been a while because I've realized that I haven't had something to say. And I think that's important. Like, I think you have to have a really clear point of view about a story, or it has to just be in you that you just have to get out. You have no choice because book writing is brutal. It's very thankless. It's very lonely. I always said there should be a support group for people writing books because you're living in this vacuum and you don't have anyone to bounce ideas off of all the time. And so for me, Food Heroes was his first book. I just had to tell the story of these people. And I think I related to them because they were really following their passion, marching to the beat of their own drum. And so it was about 16 people living in different parts of the world that were preserving these dying food traditions. And I got to travel and they would let me into their lives. And I spent time with them and I told their stories, and there was recipes at the end of the chapters, and I took their photographs. And so that was my first book. And it took me about, I would say 9 months to a year from selling it to submitting it. And then there's a process. Once you've submitted it, there's a few iterations where you have to edit, first pass, second pass edits, and then they lay it out and they do the art and the book cover. And
who are the people that are overseeing? Like, is it an editor or what? What does that look
like? So I sold my books to each editor. Editors are at publishing houses.
Okay.
So
I'm I'm just like from a 3,000 foot view. I think just people would be curious in the audience to just like, oh, how does one get concept from brain to in the store.
So you need an agent. Agents have those relationships with editors. Editors work for publishing houses, and they cover different verticals. So there'll be editors who specialize in food, whether it's cookbooks or food narratives or lifestyle, maybe gardening. There'll be people who specialize in economics or academic or politics. Or so my agent pitched my book to various editors who specialized in this genre, who they felt would be responsive to it. And so what will happen, and depending on the book, and sometimes you'll have multiple offers, and then it'll go to auction, or sometimes you'll be lucky to get one offer, and so they give you an advance. This is for nonfiction. If it's fiction, you actually have to write the entire thing, complete
that sounds horrible,
polish it, and then see if anyone will buy it from you. So there's definitely more of a risk. But for nonfiction, you write the proposal, which is an outline with sample chapters and a bunch of other things, and they give you an advance, and then you use that money to go and write it.
So did you get the money, and then that's what helped you go around and do all that stuff?
But
Especially since Lehman Brothers went.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't give you all the money, so you only get it in chunks over time. So they give you a little bit, and then time goes by, then they give you some more. Sort of based on milestones. Did you submit it? Okay, now you've submitted it. Now we'll give you more money. And, okay, it's published. Now we'll give you more money.
Seems like a good system to hold you accountable.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I did. And that's sort of the process. And, your relationship with your editor is really important. And so it's important to choose one that you feel like you have a rapport with, that you're going to work well with, because this is your life for the next couple of years. And I actually sold my second one before my first one came out.
That's crazy.
Which is crazy. I mean, I think, times have changed, I guess. But my second book was called Girl Hunter. And that is the one that I think that was the one that created the most waves, perhaps, or at least got the most attention in terms of my career progressing, because I told the story of my journey as a chef, going over field and stream in search of the main course, because I took it back to that moment when I was killing that turkey at Blue Hill at Stone Barns. And I really wanted to explore that. What is it to be an omnivore, to choose to eat meat? And what does it take to really do it all yourself, to roll up your sleeves like our grandparents' generation did, or our great-grandparents' generation did, and do more with less, and harvest your own food? So interestingly, the editor for that book was a vegetarian. And what I loved about that is that she and I both realized that we had the same philosophy about food and meat eating and the importance of our relationship with it. But the only difference is that she realized she couldn't kill the animal, and I realized that I could. And it was a really wonderful relationship that we had. And we worked on that book for a while. And once again, though, I cranked it out pretty quickly because I had it in me. I just had to tell that story. And I'd started a blog at that time. It was just my name, georgiapellegrini.com. And I started chronicling some of these experiences with the artisans that I was meeting in my first book, or my journey as a chef trying to go hunt javelina in West Texas and make it taste good. And, and people were starting to invite me on these hunting experiences at their ranches or their land. And it was one of those weird moments when I was still pretty naive, that people, when they read your blog or your website, and now more than ever on social media, they feel like they know you. And you don't realize that people feel like they're familiar with you. When you're just putting things out into the world, you sort of forget people are actually reading it and watching it. So I got myself into some pretty funny situations, just showing up to places. Looking back, probably wasn't the best judgment, but it always worked out. But, showing up and meeting strange men at like 5 a.m. to go hunting with them and with guns and such.
You're like, hey, I saw this post. We should do this. Yeah.
But it was cool because I got to tell some really cool stories. And that was my second book, Girl Hunter. Every chapter was a new place, a new hunt, a new animal, and then a new set of recipes. And it has, I think, over 100 recipes in there for how to cook and age and make wild game. And that was a hit because I think it was surprising. I didn't fit the profile of the typical American hunter in people's minds. I think, there's this cliche that hunters are men who go out into the woods together and tell dirty jokes and shoot at things. And I was suddenly...
Is it true?
It's really not. I mean, there's always an idiot, in life, in many aspects. But, overall, I think that hunters are very thoughtful, conscious human beings who are approaching the world and the land around them in a very different way. Mm-hmm. And I think that as someone who cares about my relationship with food and wants to do something that's not always, supporting the industrial food feedlot system that we have, I thought it was an important way to choose to eat meat. And I think you respect it more. You use more of the animal. When you've had to work that hard for something, it just has a whole new meaning. And once again, being out in nature, being in the wild and hunting, in a way, it's a lot like being in those professional kitchens. You see differently, you smell differently, you taste differently. Your senses are heightened in a way that they're not when you're walking down a city street. And I think being that alive and being that present is such an incredible experience for humans that we don't do often enough anymore. We're all sort of operating in this manic state on the, surfing the information highway and on social media, and we're all being very reactive all the time. And I think being in nature, hearing the woods wake up, activating those senses that aren't as active and present as they normally are in everyday life it's just a really special thing. And I think it's in our DNA as humans. And when you activate that, it sort of like flips this switch in you and you become hooked. You want to be doing it more. You want to be out in nature more. And that's sort of how my adventure getaways came to life.
With your adventure getaways, explain exactly what it is that you're doing with them now. And then with that, is there any person that's come back that's just talked about how they don't take food for granted now?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, I have to say, I think one of the greatest blessings of my life are these adventure getaways. And let me tell you a little bit for your audience what they are.
Yeah, exactly.
When my second book came out, I started waking up every morning and getting these emails from strangers, and they would say things like, "I think you can help me," in the subject line. And it was very strange because this was not why I set out to write a book, but people were pouring their hearts out to me saying, I've got cancer and, I'm going through this, or I'm recovering, and I want to feel empowered. I want to feel alive again. I want to step outside my comfort zone. And I feel like you're the person that I want to do that with. And I want to go on an adventure with you. I'll never forget, I had a man write to me about his 14-year-old niece, and she had been depressed for a really long time, and they couldn't get her to snap out of it. They tried so many things, and one day she just did, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. They finally asked her. They said, "What is it? Like, what's changed for you? Why are you feeling differently?" And she said it was because I had made her realize that there was nothing that girls couldn't do. And, every time I just still get chills every time, because that was never really my intention. But I think I'm a big believer in showing by doing rather than telling. And so living a life that you want to live. And I think other people will be encouraged by that. And so I was getting a lot of emails from strangers who were encouraged to change their life in some way. They wanted to leave their corporate jobs, or they wanted to just feel the wind in their hair. They just needed something different. So I kind of started this grand human experiment. I was like, well, I guess I could try to have a bunch of women come along with me. And I chose to do it for women only because I had recognized that there really wasn't an outlet for women to really experience the outdoors that easily. There was a lot of spaces for men to do it. It was a thing that men would go off and do together, but women were sort of left at home.
I love how you're niching down.
Yeah. But I also think it goes back to just having been around strong women growing up who really inspired me. I went to an all-girls high school. I went to an all-women's college. So I just, interestingly, I worked in very male environments on the trading floor at Lehman Brothers in professional kitchens. So I've never come at things from the angle of hardcore feminists. It's just been really about, wanting to support other women. And I think that women should be doing that for each other. And I think that's, when we lift each other up, we all rise. And so I wanted to take women on this experience because it had been one that I had been on with a lot of men, and I never had a lot of women to do it with. So I planned the first adventure getaway, and it took on a life of its own.
Where was it?
Well, I had a little mini one for the launch of my book, and that wasn't really one. That was in Texas. The first official one was in Montana. Mm-hmm. And it was wild. I had a long waiting list. The Wall Street Journal wrote about it. I had another one because I had this long waiting list. And then the New York Times came and followed us around. And then I had more, and I had a woman come from as far as South Korea. Then HBO came and followed us around. And I mean, I had just all this media was coming, wanting to tell the story because they thought it was really interesting that these corporate women, these women who had never, filleted a fish or harvested a dove or a deer or anything, were actually suddenly getting their hands in this.
Going from Wall Street, glossy cocktails, over to France, three-legged kitten, like all that stuff, like you wanting to tell the story of other chefs. Now at this point in your life, all these other media outlets are coming to tell your story. Yeah. How about that?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, and none of this was premeditated, and I think the lesson in that is the importance of marching to the beat of your own drum, the importance of really digging deep and figuring out in your soul what it is you're meant to be doing. Because I think like you build it and they will come. And I think that you can't just march around and talk about everything. You've got to start doing things. Because I think showing by doing is what inspires change and action and others to follow and be interested. And so, it's like the media stuff has been nice, but it's all about the work for me. Like I love that I have designed the life that I want to live. My life is my work and my work is my life, which is a really strange existence. I live this life that has become, I guess, what they call a brand. And I've had a hard time with that word brand for a long time because it's felt synthetic. But I guess everyone's got a personal brand at the end of the day. And it's what you put forth into the world. That's kind of one of the things I talk about a lot when I do public speaking is, the importance of defining that personal brand and tapping into sort of who you really are and want to be and honing that and owning it.
What does the term living your own truth mean to you?
I think it's really living the life that makes you want to hop out of bed in the morning. Like I love hopping out of bed in the morning. I don't have a day where I'm like, oh, I can't deal with the world today. I'm like, okay, let's go. What's going on today? Like I got things to do. And I think if you can live a life where you're excited to hop out of bed and not dreading going to work or whatever it is that you have ahead of you, what can you do? Like, how can you tinker? It goes back to me tinkering. Like, how can I adjust and tinker until I've created a dynamic in which this is like the best life for me, the best life I want to live. And, you have obviously you have other people to take into consideration, spouses and children and family, but I think that's important to figure out how that can all work together and not living this life that you're dreading every day. And I think too many people do that.
Mm-hmm. Not only that, but by you living the life that you want to, you're setting the example for everyone around you.
Totally. Yeah. And I think women especially need to do that for each other. I didn't have a lot of female role models or mentors growing up. I had great women in my family, so they were role models, but I didn't have any in my work environment. And I didn't have a lot sort of reaching out to me, to professionally encourage me. And so I think what's so incredible about these adventure getaways, I just had one 2 weeks ago, and so it's fresh in my mind. The women that came were so incredible. It just blew my mind. I mean, accomplished in their own right, but it's like this network that forms of lifelong friends. And they live all over the country, in some cases in other countries. And they have reunions and they stay in touch and they come on the next one together. They plan who's going to go on which one. And I have this secret women-only Facebook group for these adventure getaways that they all kind of communicate on. And I always encourage women to join that if they want to be part of that network. And even if they haven't gone on an adventure getaway, because I think what's so cool is you have this network of like powerful sisterhood, and everyone brings something interesting to the table and they're funny and smart and dynamic. And the fact that I get to be part of that and we go out into the woods together and have a great time. And, I think women especially are their own worst critics. Oftentimes we self-edit. We're very meticulous and hard on ourselves. And I think this environment is a chance for women to try new things with abandon and not take themselves so seriously. Try it knowing you're not going to be perfect all the time at it. But it's a space to try things and fail and laugh and it's really, it has this magic fairy dust on it, these trips. They really do. It's crazy. Every time I'm like so OCD about planning them and making sure they're up to my standard, and then they just unfold in front of me and I'm like, wow, like everyone just keeps getting better. Just when I think like it's not going to get better, it does. So it's incredible to be part of that network and have access to all those women in my orbit now, and how incredible it is that it just sprung up organically as a result of just me trying to tell my truth.
It sounds like you have, especially during these kinds of trips, a sense of like very meaningful conversations and you're getting past fluff within the first like whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm actually curious, with your very first getaway, the first official one versus like now, what have you learned? And just from the practical standpoint of like, when you set to go out and do one, what are you looking for and all that kind of stuff? Because I'm curious, like if I were in your situation and people are reaching out and they want to do this and you want to provide a good experience, like, oh, where's step one? Where do you go from there? That whole thing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going through it right now, actually, planning the next one. So I have really high standards, and part of that is because I've earned a tremendous amount of trust over the years from these women, and I take that seriously. And so I've had a lot of venues reach out wanting me to do them there. And I've really had to be specific and uncompromising about the variables that I need in order for it to be kind of what I'm looking for them.
Approaching it with veracity.
So, I want it to be that really perfect combination of ruggedness with creature comforts. Women are not going to go sleep in, a tent and like not shower for 4 days. I want them to feel comfortable and have an opportunity to have fun and let their hair down. But they're also going to like go out into the woods and get blood on their hands and, be on an ATV high up or do things that scare them. And so it's that balance of giving them those like uncomfortable step outside your comfort zone moments with the ability to like have a nice glass of wine at the end of the day and, make things and learn to cook it at the end. For example, the adventure getaway I just had, it was a wild boar adventure getaway. Mm-hmm. So we hunted wild boar. I taught them how to skin it. I taught them how to butcher it. We made sausage. Then we had like a sommelier there who did a wild game wine pairing class, which was so interesting. We made bespoke smudging sticks, where you like get awesome. the energy right in your life. Just fun, hands-on, like I said, manual literacy, how to use your hands in so many different types of ways. And what's so incredible is that these women are naturally so patient and meticulous. Women are in general. And so they always think they're going to be terrible at these things. And they show up and like, they're so good naturally. And I think that's what's so interesting is women always come to the table with, a certain degree of humility, and they always outperform. It's just amazing to watch. And it's fun to see them get their knives out and start skinning this wild pig for the first time in their lives. And they're just ecstatic. And then they bring all this food home for their families. They have my one friend, she just went wild boar hunting on this trip. And, we made all these cuts of meat and this sausage, and everyone gets their own cooler to bring it home in. And she hosted this incredible wild boar dinner party in her Brooklyn apartment with like big balloons that said wild boar and like metallic silver. And, she made wild boar bolognese. She made this incredible like loin, and she also made like a confit with fat where you spread it, like a releé. Because I give them all these recipes that they can try, and so they take it to the end, which is what I want. It's not just showing up and like shooting some trophy and hanging it on your wall. Like that's not what this is about, and that's often what I have to articulate to these venues. Like this is a different type of experience. This is not a corporate hunt or something. It's about like the cycle of life and participating in that. Mm-hmm. So women come back often. And so I want each new experience to be new. And so everyone is like ground up. So it's not a scalable business. I will say that.
Yeah.
And there are moments where I'm like, why am I doing this? But it's just, there's something about them that makes me want to keep doing them. So
I love the term that you just said. It's not a scalable business, because you're like, look, I'm a very businesswoman, but just if anybody wants to hop on this train.
Yeah, there are elements to a business that need to be scalable, and then sometimes there are elements that create a platform, that are brand building, that are that put something else out into the world that's still important. And I think you need to have a balance of those two things for it to be a rich brand.
I think just from hearing you speak about it, it's a one-on-one experience that probably has so much more of a butterfly effect.
Yes.
And the longer you do it, the more it's just going to spread the positive vibes from it.
It's a really good way of putting it. And I think one of the things I had come to realize is that people can read my books, they can read my website, but I really want to have in real life experiences, because at the end of the day, that's what I'm about. I'm about like the real life aspect of things. And even as much as I have to participate in the virtual reality in order to promote my work, I think I want people to have that experience with me if they can. And, you know, it's a very intimate, intense bonding thing that these women have. And it bonds you for life. I really believe that. And so it's a, you know, it's something that I want to be able to do, like look people in the eye. It's not just ask them to go on my website or read my books. Although it's cool when they've, you know, read my books and they've been saving up and they know my story. And sometimes like this one woman, her husband just bought it for her as a birthday gift. You know, she had been reading my books for years and he sent her, which I thought was, that's a good man right there.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. Even if this isn't what you set out to do, it's another tangible thing that you've done. But you're just talking about cyberspace. Do you want to talk about what you're doing now on YouTube?
Yeah. So, you know, it's a balance, like I said. And for me, I always, at the end of the day, like I can list off all the types of things I do and the many tentacles that they have, but I just kind of believe I'm a teacher, you know, a teacher of things, of using your hands. And so I had a show that aired on Discovery Networks, and the merger between Scripps and Discovery happened, and it sort of went into this black hole. But I think it was an amazing show called Wild Food. The audience loved it. And what I realized was that I like the ability to access people in a way that's, especially shorter form content. You know, I think people don't have attention spans anymore.
Yeah, like
no
your
one has
videos
cable
are very
either.
short hits of information.
And people don't have cable anymore, and everyone's going online now. So what I've started to do is produce short form content on my YouTube channel. And it's been a really great way of teaching people what I call manual literacy in many aspects of life, like the garden, the home, the wild, recipes, projects, and skills for a self-sufficient life, how to do more with less, how to roll up your sleeves. And not everyone's going to have a Montana field to go and hunt pheasant in, or, you know.
Great example. Thank you. Because I don't.
You don't? Or like, you know, a ton of land around them. You know, we all live very different lives, but there are ways that you can get back to the land, even in the smallest of ways, whether it's, you know, living in a studio apartment in Manhattan and growing 25 pounds of potatoes in a garbage bag on your fire escape, or, you know,
how about that?
Or making butter, you know, in your kitchen with your kids, or making homemade fresh mozzarella. It's actually simpler than you think. And so for me, I think those are the things that bring people joy in life. I think when you use your hands, when you practice manual literacy, it's the antidote, and it taps into these natural human instincts that we all have deep inside of us, some more than others, that we've lost touch with. And I think when you reconnect with that, it changes your life. I've seen it change the life of all of these women time after time. And so my hope and my goal with this YouTube channel is that it will spark joy and happiness and empowerment. Because, you know, I always say, like, self-sufficiency is the ultimate girl or boy power, really. And I think when you can be a little more self-sufficient in life, it's amazing how inspiring that can feel.
Yeah, and I do think with the videos that you put out, that is a scalable thing.
Yeah.
Especially for people that want to get familiar with your content.
Yes.
Just to give the audience an idea, can you just, like a lightning round, give 3 ways to use coffee grinds, but not for coffee?
Okay, great. Yeah. So coffee grinds are amazing, actually. They're acidic and abrasive. They also have caffeine. So what I like to do is, when you have your morning coffee, you've got these coffee grinds, and most people toss them out after they've made their coffee, but you can upcycle them. So one of the things I love to do is actually make a body scrub. You mix it with some brown sugar, some sea salt, some olive oil, and the coffee grinds. Keep it in a jar in your your shower. Rub it on your body. The caffeine is actually great for your skin, especially for women. It tightens your skin, it reduces cellulite, and it feels amazing. And then the olive oil will just moisturize. So that's a really fun way. if you're not worried about your cellulite, you can actually take the coffee grinds and put them in your compost if you have compost, or if you have indoor houseplants, you can sprinkle them on the soil, and it actually helps keep away insects and ants. So think about these things that we throw out that you should be keeping.
So she just said all of that in like 1 minute. If you want to get an idea of the encyclopedia of information, definitely check out her YouTube channel. Speaking of the just making coffee in general, when you made the cowboy coffee and you put the eggshells in there, I was like, my mind was blown.
Yeah. If your coffee is too acidic, you can drop some eggshells on there and it'll make it more alkaline. So.
With that, can you give an example of other stuff that you do on the channel, to other tips and stuff? Because I know there's Wild Garden Home. Is that it?
That's right.
Oh, I got it right. Boom.
Look at you. You're good study. And it's a huge range. Some are funny and whimsical. Some are more serious and useful. Like I have a really fun one that's like, take an Altoids tin and empty it and turn that tin into a 48-hour survival toolkit. And you just like put it in your back pocket, put it in your glove compartment. I just, I'm always like a big believer in always be prepared. And it's useful to have a little survival kit literally in an Altoids tin that fits.
Those little pill thingies that you had in there to purify water or like filter water. I didn't even know those existed.
I feel like every human should know how to purify their own water. I mean, I remember living in New York when there was a power outage and, everyone was worried about how long that was going to happen. Things happen in life. And I think it's a really cool thing to know how to do things. Another I'm trying to think of something more fun and whimsical. I mean, I have all kinds of great recipes, whether it's wild game recipes. I have, I love preserving herbs and flowers. I have one where you can turn like all these beautiful little flowers into sugared flowers and preserve them and add them to cakes and cupcakes.
I didn't even know what a succulent was until you did that one video. I was like, oh, that's what these things are.
Yeah, how to grow and have succulents that are doing well. I feel like a lot of people kill their plants, and so some tips on how to not do that. I even have some fun stuff like how to make your own lip gloss, like tinted lip gloss. And you can tint it with beet.
It's a lot easier than what people
can. This stuff is so easy, but we just sort of it's like I said, it's like a literacy thing. We've lost touch with it, and so it's not as intuitive as it was for our grandparents.
And speaking of the actually having experiences, I love that you can tell that you're tried and true with what you're talking about, especially like when you were doing, I think it was the peppers or drying the peppers or something like that. Like just the little tidbit of like, look, just get a big needle that has a very big hole and don't cut the end of the yarn because you never know how many you're going to have to put on there. And I was like, that's like literally, if you hadn't tried it before yourself, totally. You wouldn't have known that.
Totally. I'm kind of like the guinea pig. I'll try all the things out and let you know how to not do it and how to do it.
So there's two questions that I ask everybody at the end of each podcast. Okay. And first one is, why do you do what you do?
Because I just feel like in my gut, it's what I'm meant to do. It's the only other way I can think of it is like it makes me want to hop out of bed in the morning. It's weird. It comes from a really deep place, and I think also because I'm not a good employee. So I have no choice. I have to work for myself.
You did have the path of being an employee, and it makes it so much, you have so much more respect, or I do at least, whenever I have to like freelance or give out, I can't even think of the term, when you delegate things. I'm like, I know exactly what this person has to go through now in order to do this task.
Totally.
It gives you so much more of a good background in that. And then the second one that I always ask everybody is to get from, let's say you were at Wall Street and you just left Wall Street, to get from that point to where you're at now. If somebody wanted to not follow your same exact path, but it sounds like you are very living your truth kind of thing. What advice would you give?
I get this question actually a lot from college students and young people who write to me, actually.
That's who I try and gear it towards. It's like, because when I one of the questions that I always like to ask is when people are graduating, because I feel like that's such a turning point.
Yep.
And with people coming on here talking about their passions, there's a lot to be given from the specific career paths that people have chosen.
And I think it's a really important question, because I don't just give out the advice like just do what makes you happy, because I don't think that's what this is about. I think it's understanding who you are. And I think the moment that I took a Myers-Briggs and I most recently took an Enneagram and really understood who I am, that was the moment that I felt really empowered to take the path that I wanted to take. But you have to know what your strengths are and you have to know what your weaknesses are. I know that I'm a hustler. every day I will work morning, noon, and night, and I will love it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know I couldn't tell you what day this is right now. I don't know if it's a Saturday. I don't know if it's a Monday. Like, I work all the time, but it doesn't feel like work because I love what I'm doing. You have to be that kind of person to do certain things. Some people like the security of certain things. They like the security of a paycheck. They like the security of, just kicking back on a weekend by the pool with a glass of rosé. Like, I'm probably not the person who's going to do that. And that's okay. Like, everyone's got a different personality type. So I think you need to really understand your personality type before you just say, hey, I'm just going to go wing it. Mm-hmm. For me, I never felt like I was winging it. I felt like I was taking a risk, a leap of faith, but I also understood my jackhammer personality such that I would hustle until it worked, or I'd figure out a solution for myself always. And so I think it's about really understanding who you are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. What is that thing? Like, are you an introvert? I'm an introvert. It surprises people, but I get my energy from being calm and quiet and alone. Being on TV, I can do all that, but it exhausts me. So I need to go recharge. Like, learning those things about yourself. And do you need to be in an environment where there's no doors to close? Can you handle that? Or is that going to exhaust you? It's those little tinkering things, of really honing in on who you are that I think allows you to build that roadmap to a more empowered, fulfilling life. But you really need to figure that out, those fundamentals first. And then from there, figure out, okay, like, what does my ideal life look like to me? What am I doing when I'm at my happiest? And I think if you could answer that question, there's a way to find a career around that.
Yeah. And I'm familiar with Myers-Briggs, but what's the second one that you referred to?
It's called the Enneagram, and it goes a little more deeply into the nuances of personality types. It's numbers 1 through 9. And you figure out what number you are based on a series of questions. There's like an online version that you can take. It's like $11 and it's worth it. And it's very layered. It's like peeling back an onion. And it's also interesting to think about, like, if you have a spouse or a partner, finding out what their number is and seeing how those two numbers work together. I'm a big believer in that sort of self investigation, because it's like you always want to be working on yourself in life, right? I mean, hopefully we're getting better with age, I hope, and more mature and more wise. And I think the only way you do that is by really knowing yourself, and I think that makes you a more grounded human being on this earth, and better to other people and better to yourself.
Awesome. I'll have to check it out. Where can people find you?
GeorgiaPellegrini.com. And then all of my social media is linked from there. My YouTube is Georgia Pellegrini. And that's where I'm doing a lot of my content right now. And then we have, from my GeorgiaPellegrini.com website, a link to my Adventure Getaways website, which is adventuregetaways.com.
Awesome. And then just for your Adventure Getaways, what does that look like if somebody wanted to pursue reaching out to do something like that? Is there a process? How does that look?
So I would encourage women to join the secret women-only Facebook group.
This term, like, it's secret.
Yeah, secret.
I'm heard it here on the Passion and Progress show.
The word out. It's not a secret anymore. They can access it. I have a link to it from my Instagram page in the bio. I have a link to it from my main Facebook page. It's just a group that's a subgroup, and that's where I kind of announce all the details first. But then adventuregetaways.com will always have where we're going next, and it kind of gives the details. If the info is not up yet, because I'm in the planning stages like I am right now, join my mailing list, which you can access at either georgiapellegrini.com or adventuregetaways.com. You just add your email and you'll get notified when I announce the next one.
And it sounds like it's a great present from the husband.
It is. It is. The best men are the ones who get their wives a chance to kind of get the wind in their hair and do something for them.
Awesome. So if you want to find me anywhere on social, you can see me at Javier Mercedes X. That's Javier Mercedes X. And don't forget to share this out. And if you really enjoyed this podcast, you could do things like leave a review on iTunes. That would be so special. Thank you again for your time. And till next time, live a life of abundance. And I'll see you guys later. If you guys are listening to this podcast on the iTunes app, if you could please leave me a review. That is a place that lets me know how my show is doing. If you are interested in supporting the podcast through Patreon, it is www.patreon.com/Javier Mercedes. That's Javier Mercedes, just like the car.